And now, under Standing Order 38, we move to Leaders' Questions. Deputy Mary Lou McDonald.
My God. So here we go again, Tishuk. Your government never tires of wasting taxpayers' money. €750,000 to construct 14 steps and a ramp at Deer Park in Mount Marion. Let me say, access to public spaces for people with disabilities is very, very important. But for €750,000, I was expecting a breathtaking feat of engineering, but no, nothing spectacular here. In fact, it's very, very ordinary, literally just steps and a ramp. The only breathtaking thing about this is the cost. €750,000 forked out from the public purse. Procurement experts have described this spend as wildly excessive. I would describe it as downright insulting to people. Now, I've raised issues of waste with you time and again, but Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael haven't learnt a single thing from the litany of waste that is now the hallmark of your government. You are serial wasters of public money. Hundreds of thousands for bike sheds, 1.4 million for a security hut, $500,000 for a perimeter wall, 20 million renting offices that lay empty, over €100,000 on a scanner for the National Gallery that lay idle for almost a decade. Little wonder then that the PAC's report yesterday pointed to serious and persistent deficiencies in spending oversight from the Department for the Arts. And this is the case right across government. The list of waste is as long as your arm. I could go on, but I would literally be here all day. And whilst government pours millions of people's money down the drain, workers and families count every single euro just to get by. The same government that delivered a budget of €9.4 billion that left people worse off. The same government that cancelled energy credits as families struggle to light and heat their homes. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael keep the strings of the public purse very, very tight for working people. You're on the ball there, very, very diligent. But by God, are you happy for people's cash to be blown at every other turn? No oversight, no governance, no accountability, nobody shouting stop. In the grand scheme of your billions, €750,000 might not mean a lot to you, but it would pay the salaries of 20 new special needs assistants or 20 new nurses for a year. But instead, the money is spent on a few steps and a ramp that surely could have been built for a fraction of that cost. It is scandalous. Your government is incapable of dealing with what is clearly a widespread systemic problem. Tá €4 million caiitear céim agus rampa, léiríonn sé sill go bhfuil an rialtas fós a chur amú airgid nós cumalam. Tishuk, you are allowing this waste of public money to happen over again, and you're doing nothing about it. So I have two questions for you. Firstly, do you believe that €750,000 for steps and a ramp represents value for the people's money? And do you now accept that a waste audit across government departments, as called for by Sinn Féin, is now urgently required to get to grips with this constant waste?
First of all, say to the Deputy that I don't believe 750,000 is right or proper in terms of, or appropriate in terms of 14 steps, but I think it seems to me that the scheme which was completed by Dún Laoghaire County Council is not just about 14 steps. And nonetheless, the cost is excessive by any yardstick. I would say, you said Sinn Féin have called for a waste audit. I think Sinn Féin could take the example of Deputy Albert Donald here in front of me, who has done more than most deputies in the House to shine a light on public expenditure with his online facility and so on. So that's a deputy who's doing the work that you're asking us to do. you know, Sinn Féin's very good at asking, but surely you have a bit of resources yourself and capacity if you're that concerned about waste, other than utilising, you know, a particular case which is bad to try and just go on the waste thing and as a political exercise and an electoral exercise. In terms of the interaction between the NTA and the County Council, 750,000 is too much. Accessibility is very important. And in the context of accessibility in terms of wheelchair users, cyclists, parents with buggies and so on, that was the original objective, apparently, of this scheme by the Council and the NTA. And more generally, about 360 million of capital funds has been provided for walking and cycling infrastructure in 2025. The vast majority of it on budget and on time, and providing exceptional resources to people. That's the other side of the story. We can pick the one project that is without question excessive and difficult to comprehend in terms of costs. But there have been many other projects that I've witnessed which have revolutionised active travel in this country, in every town and city and county in the country. And thankfully more funding will be announced today in respect of more active travel, in terms of greenways and so forth. And yes, there has to be a rigorous focus on costs, no question about that, and on value for money in respect of changes. And we will work with, there is a local authority audit structure there to audit what local authorities are doing, and also in respect of the NTA. I'm sure you must be aware of because you'd have probably spoken to your councillors and so on, that the project, apparently this particular project was new pedestrian cycle ramp, a new granite access to upgrading of existing concrete footpaths, construction of new signalised pedestrian crossing, traffic calming measures, retaining walls and so on, which were all put in. So there's a significant list and so on like that. But again, I don't personally engage in every item of council expenditure, although I think the work that Albert Dolan has done has been very effective actually in terms of providing material for people to track public expenditure on specific projects. And I'm sure Sinn Féin can avail of his good work in respect of that. But it is a serious issue if a council exceeds significantly. I mean, the original cost, I think, was in and around about 400,000, and the final cost is 750, and that's, by any yardstick, unacceptable, notwithstanding whatever complexities were involved. So, ar a bhíam nach níos since sásúil in échor, agus bhí an tography cabadal córla don léir a bhreacht down, bhí siad ag obair leis an NTA ar dús, agus is omarcha cathlachas ar fad ar an tography leis an.
So bad and so chronic is the pattern of waste that even your own members have to acknowledge it, even if you can't, Tishuk. That's where we are at. If this were a once-off event, that would be one thing, but you see, it's not. This is part now of an established pattern of waste. As an established pattern of waste on your watch. It is persistent and it is right across government. It's not simply local authorities, it is right at the heart of your government. And to add insult to injury, your government that tolerates, that allows, that's asleep at the wheel while vast sums of public monies are wasted, is the same government that is very vigilant, very mean, very tight when it comes to working people. So I want to ask you again, will you now instigate, as you are the Tishuk, not I, will you instigate a waste audit right across government? Because that is what is required. Or will you simply allow money, the people's money to be wasted again and again and again?
And the Minister of Jack Chambers has already introduced procedures and more robust and tighter procedures in terms of public spending. On the other hand, you're saying we're very mean and so on like that. We're being criticised for overspending. And notwithstanding your desire that we spend billions more, I mean, you want us to spend billions more than we allocated in the budget. But Ireland's economy is one of the fastest growing economies globally. The stewardship of this economy has been good by this government and by the last government, despite COVID, despite Brexit, despite the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the energy crisis that followed, despite the tariffs emanating from the United States. This has been a competent government in relation to the economic management of this country. And the policies we have pursued are far superior to anything you've produced on the economic front over the last number of years. No question about that. We have no truck with any waste in public expenditure, and we will deal with it at every layer of government. But you have councillors on that council. Well, your councillors, but every other councillor tracking it and so on like that. And so let's stop. You should not be, and it's not good enough that there would be that level of expenditure, but we will deal with it.
Deputy Ivana Bacik.
I want to just welcome a group of transition year students who are with me today into the gallery, aspiring TDs. You're very welcome. Tishuk, your government is budgeting like there is no tomorrow. It seems that prudent Pascal was actually profligate Pascal. Mr Donoghue goes to Washington and leaves behind an overspend, climbing towards €4 billion in 2025. In his second week on the job, overspend. In his second week on the job, the Taoiseach has had a rap on the knuckles from the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council, and IFAC have once again pointed out what is plain for all to see. Your budget is a work of fiction. Now, you've just said, Tishuk, that you're competent on the economy, but you don't even have a fiscal plan beyond next year. Were you a CEO coming before a board of directors, it's hard to see how you'd be allowed to continue in your role, frankly. Now, you castigate the opposition for calling for investment, and government spokespersons in the media today painted a picture of perfect prudence. You claim to be balancing the need to run a society as well as the economy, and that's right, of course you should. But Tishuk, what have you got to show for the running of society? More than 5,000 children homeless, unaffordable rents and house prices, a creaking health service, massive under-resourcing of public services, like special education for children, like our defence forces, to take just two examples. As my colleague Deputy Marie Sherlock said today on RTE, it's not just what you spend, it's how you spend it. And your failure to invest in sustainable infrastructure leaves people's living standards at the mercy of the market. That's your philosophy to governing too. Take an example. We train world-class healthcare workers and then we lose them to emigration. And more than 3,500 HSE jobs are vacant, much-needed therapists vacant roles across the country. Meanwhile, you'll spend €750 million on agency staff this year. Is that prudent, Tishuk? The housing disaster is the civil rights issue for the generation of the TY students with us today. Yet you refuse to unleash the power of the state to build. Last year, councils and approved housing bodies built barely 300 social homes. But the state has spent €2 billion buying homes on the market, a model that costs 20% more than direct build. So you're siphoning public money into the bank accounts of private developers, pricing ordinary buyers out of the process. Is that prudent, Tishuk? And finally, was your budget giveaway to burger barons and big builders really prudent, Tishuk? A subsidy for the wealthiest in society, no evidence it will save a single job, and the new finance minister's fingerprints all over it. Tishuk, IFAC's report today is a damning indictment on your government's economic judgment, and it provides further evidence of an abject failure to plan for the future. So I want to know, Tishuk, will we see anything resembling a credible plan by the end of this year? Plan.
Medium-term framework.
Medium-term framework.
And could I just say, in terms of the IFAC criticism, because you've had both sides of, I welcome the students as well, and the transition year students. By the way, your party was notified on Friday that I wouldn't be here yesterday at 2:30 by email. There was a bit of maybe inadvertent misleading at the House yesterday, but we'll pass over that. Just to say that IFAC did a research note recently on the impact of US tariffs and other policy changes that might affect corporation tax receipts. And there's a downside to it in terms of which we know about the exceptional reliance on corporation tax. That's accepted. But equally, IFAC did say in that note that whilst there's been a surge in pharma exports due to the tariffs at the beginning of the year, there's also been, quote, a permanent increase in activity here as well. And that Ireland is still a key manufacturing hub for ingredients and popular weight loss drugs, for example, they're going to grow strongly. Global sales are going to reach 62 billion in 2030. Patents don't expire until 2036, 2037. Global minimum tax pillar 2 will generate extra top-up revenues. The point I'm making is we need both downside and upside scenarios in terms of economic planning. And invariably, and if it's a downside, and that's fair enough, if I have to do that, that's their job. But it's equally valid to say you need upside scenario planning as well in terms of future forecasting and planning, which doesn't tend to happen. And I'm saying that as a criticism of government as well, because the government tends to, the partners and so on will do that, but will tend to go on the downside. And that's acceptable. I have no issue other than to say we should look at the other side of the equation as well. And also in terms of the determination of expenditure rules. I mean, future expenditure rules, in my view, should be credible. They should reflect growth of the real economy and inflation rates. Perhaps the fiscal target of 5% at the beginning of the last government did not adequately reflect real economic growth and inflation growth. And hence what happened subsequently was budgets went ahead of the 5%. And when you factor in population growth in particular and the consequential pressures on services, you begin to see how expenditure did rise over that fiscal rule. We will be submitting, of course we will, a medium fiscal term plan to Europe as is required, but I do think we have to get it right, because you will be the very first deputy in here at next year's budget or the budget afterwards saying we should have spent more on this and spent more on that. And so I want to make sure that we have a medium-term fiscal rule with the Minister of Finance and Sean Kenny and the Independents that reflects reality, population growth and potential expenditures, and then once we agree to stay within those limits. So the rule has to be realistic in the context of real economic growth and inflation forecasts, and we're working on that. IMF have done some work on this, by the way, in respect of Ireland.
You'll be back in, Tishuk. Deputy Bacik.
Gurmaga and Tishuk, genuinely I was taken by surprise yesterday when you weren't here, but I did say it was a nice surprise to see Minister O'Brien, taking your place. Could I just say that, I stand over what I say. Prudence is not being miserly. It's spending responsibly. It's about responsible spending. And we are told that one of the Taoiseach's first meetings last week as the new Minister for Finance was with IFAC. So the question is, did he learn anything from this? Because what we've seen has been persistent delays producing a medium-term spending framework. Now, I know you've said now, and the Taoiseach has also said it will be produced. I think by the end of this year, the Taoiseach has said. You might just clarify that. But there has been a huge delay in that, because that was supposed to happen after the last election. And we're seeing also, as I've said, a dipping into windfall corporation tax jackpots to lavish cash on burger barons and big builders. And again, the Labour Party stood against that VAT cut. We stood against a narrowing of the tax base. We supported government on the legislation to set up the rainy day funds. So we can't be accused of being profligate. But we are asking you to be more prudent.
Tishuk to respond.
We've announced a 270 billion national development plan. I mean, that's the fundamental pillar of this government, and we've already allocated the funding. Today there'll be a transport sectoral plan will be published, which will be very significant in terms of roads, rail and bus developments that are going to happen as a result of that. We will have a children and disabilities sectoral development plan. We will have a health sectoral development plan that puts fleshes on the bone, real projects that will happen. It will be quite transformative. But it's not just investment, it is reform also, led by the Department of Public Expenditure and Jack Chambers in respect of the infrastructure division and getting infrastructure done faster. And if we could have less objections and less judicial reviews, we might achieve that. You're talking about you're talking about 300 million VAT reduction in terms of construction and apartments. If we get more apartments built, we get a net increase in revenue out of it, not a reduction. Because we do need more apartments, no question we need more apartments. We're not building enough of them, and that's why the VAT reduction in the budget was introduced, along with all the other measures we've done on housing in terms of rental reform with the RPZs, which was recommended by the Housing Commission, that we do that to make sure we get
Social
accommodation in
Democrats,
private
Deputy
sector and public
Cairns.
sector investment in housing to get the number
Deputy
of houses and
Cairns.
apartments that we need built.
Tishuk, on Monday, a man with an axe attacked a woman in Leixlip in her home before setting it on fire. The man, her former partner, was out on bail for previously assaulting her when he broke in and attacked her. She managed to escape and is now being treated for serious injuries in hospital. Yesterday morning, there was another vicious attack. A woman who answered her front door in Dublin was doused in petrol and set alight. She is also now in a critical condition and being treated in hospital. Tishuk, these attacks occurred less than 24 hours apart. Their depravity has shocked the country. Both women were attacked in their own homes where they should have been safest. They're not the only ones. Every day, all over the country, women endure violence, harassment, assault and intimidation. Some of them will die because of it. Last week, Stella Gallagher was killed in Cork. At her funeral mass yesterday, her brother-in-law said Miss Gallagher had an inbuilt generosity and was always doing things for others. Tishuk, these are just the stories of 3 women in the news on the week of International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, one of whom is now dead. If I were to attend any court in any part of the country on any day of the week, I would find more brutality and more tragedy for women who should be leading full and happy lives. There are so many women out there who spend every day trying to make themselves small, invisible even, who are desperate not to say the wrong thing in the wrong tone of voice or with the wrong expression, all so they don't set him off, don't make him angry, don't make him upset. Women who contribute so much to their families, their friends and their communities, who are routinely and relentlessly terrorised in their own home. Women whose lives are being ruined by controlling, abusive and violent men. Tishuk, violence against women is not a women's problem. Violence against women is a men's problem, because the common denominator when women are attacked is invariably men. And this is an issue that will never be fully addressed until more men join the fight against it and call out and report family, friends, colleagues and strangers who belittle, intimidate or insult women. Tishuk, I raised violence against women here yesterday, but I'm raising it again today because it is a daily nightmare for tens of thousands of women out there, and I wasn't happy with the answers that I received yesterday to my questions. I asked if this government really has a zero-tolerance approach to this issue, then how do you square that with 9 counties not having a refuge space? When will refuge spaces be provided in every county? That's what I asked, and I didn't get an answer. I also asked if the government would ensure that women's counselling notes could not be weaponised anymore in sexual assault trials and rape. I didn't get an answer. Can you answer those questions now?
Well, first of all, Deputy, I couldn't agree more in terms of the depraved and shocking violence against women in our society on an ongoing basis, and it is truly shocking. And despite the fact that government has taken unprecedented actions legislatively to deal with this, the establishment of an agency, CUAN, which is doing good work and is established, and the last government established that to deal with domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. About 80 million has been allocated to support CUAN now, and services working to tackle domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. That's an increase of 12 million year on year. But that in its own isn't going to solve what are more fundamental issues within society itself. Government has a zero-tolerance attitude to this, and we're supporting quite a number of community organisations that support victims and survivors. And we will accelerate the delivery of additional refuge spaces and safe accommodation, while also providing stronger support. So there's funding for additional safe spaces with a commitment to provide 282 safe spaces by the end of 2026. I'm sure the Minister and CUAN can provide you with their timeline, in terms of the various centres that need to get done and development. Minister Callan is also introducing significant legislative change to allow for the removal of guardianship rights of a person who has been convicted of killing their intimate partner under the proposed Guardianship of Infants Amendment Bill. Advanced provisions to limit the disclosure of counselling records in rape and sexual assault cases under the proposed Criminal Law and Civil Law Bill 2025, and that has been agreed already some weeks ago by Cabinet. Minister Callan secured government approval on the 21st of October to progress that particular Act, the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Domestic Violence International Instruments. That includes measures to allow perpetrators of domestic violence to be included on a new register run by the courts and strengthen the law on sexual consent. So convictions will be published online by the court service under a specific heading of domestic violence register judgment. And this will help people who are in a relationship or considering a relationship with a person to discover whether they have a history of serious domestic violence convictions. And victims will be required to provide consent before the convicted abuser can be named on the public register. Minister Callan did secure cabinet approval for the drafting of legislation to address the disclosure of counselling records in sexual offences criminal trials. This will amend the current statutory framework to ensure judicial oversight governs the disclosure of such records, and that disclosure only takes place when, in the court's opinion, it is necessary to avoid an unfair trial. Drafting is at an advanced stage and is continuing at pace. The Minister is also going to examine other steps, including additional adjustments to legislation in order to further restrict the disclosure of counselling records, and is consulting with the relevant stakeholders in this regard.
Deputy Cairns.
Tishuk, what the Minister is proposing to bring forward in relation to people's counselling notes is basically a new version of the status quo. It's that people's counselling notes can be used against them in court. So I feel the need to very clearly just break this down. We know that the court process re-traumatises victims of sexual assault and rape. We know that the percentage of women who get justice for rape is minuscule, absolutely minuscule as a result of that, because people do not want to go to court. What's another way of looking at that? The percentage of people who are convicted is minuscule. That results in people being quite likely to get away with raping somebody. That is the reality. Why is the process traumatising? Let's look at it. One thing, your counselling notes being used against you in a trial, it is despicable. There is one very clear thing that this government could do to try to help the process, to try to make it less hostile towards victims, and that is ban, an outright ban of people's counselling notes being used in court. Will the government reconsider this?
Deputy, thank you. Tishuk.
To be fair to the Minister, he is advancing and working at pace in respect of legislation on the disclosure of counselling. Sorry, I didn't interrupt you, Deputy, in terms, and maybe you should engage with the Minister in an informed and evidence-based way. And the Minister will be very open with opposition spokespeople as well in terms of dealing with this in the context of what's possible and what's not possible. The desire and the government's view is very strongly supportive of reducing significantly and seeing how far we can go in avoiding the use of counselling notes against victims, and also in terms of other measures the Minister is prepared to consider. But more fundamental than all the legislation in the world is a change of culture and approach, and in terms of within society itself. And more, see, look, Deputy, I know your job is to criticise government and so on, but there are more fundamental issues here at stake in terms of violence against women. And the Minister has done some research and so on. The use of violent, or the universal access to violent pornography, for example,
Deputy Roderic
is now emerging as a factor in the level of violence that has been perpetrated against women.
We'll have
and we need to deal with this collectively.
Deputy Roderic O'Gorman next.
Sorry?
Deputy, it's Deputy Roderic O'Gorman, please.
Tishuk, I want to raise the issue of the growing levels of hate in Irish society and what steps your government can take to address it. This is the hate that led to a deliberate arson attempt on an iPass facility where women and children were living. It's the hate that compelled young men to attack 2 drag queens on the street of your own city a few weeks ago, and which allowed some passers-by to applaud. It's the hate that motivated a group of people to surround a car in City West and scream racist abuse at the Ukrainian family, including young children inside. This is the hate that drove 2 men to beat another man to death in West Dublin because he was from a different country. Tishuk, these are no longer isolated incidents. They represent a pattern of targeting vulnerable groups, vulnerable people, people who can be easily scapegoated. Our society has a growing problem with hate. It's not organic, it's not representative of real people, but as well as targeting certain groups, it is often now targeting and impinging on our democratic structures. This is beyond government and opposition. Every deputy listening to me here sees the level of hate directed against them online and too often in person. The home and family of the Taoiseach threatened, the leader of the opposition's canvassing team attacked. I welcome the announcement of the investigation by Commissioner Mann into X, but I fear that once its conclusions have been reached and then litigated in the Irish courts and then the European courts, years will have passed, and years where the toxicity from bad faith actors will have continued to target minorities and undermine our democratic norms. The algorithms that drive traffic across social media platforms that deposit videos featuring extreme content in people's feeds are incredibly powerful tools. The inadequacy of the regulation of these algorithms, and in particular, the failure to compel platforms to have these algorithms set at a default off position, has been widely identified by those campaigning for reform in an area as a key driver of hate. Tishuk, do you accept that there is a risk to social cohesion and indeed to our democratic norms from the unchecked online lies and hate? And do you agree with me that that risk is actually growing? And if so, can you indicate if your government proposes to do more, and in particular, re-examine the adequacy of the regulation of the online algorithms that drives so much of this hatred across platforms?
Thank you very much, Deputy, for raising this issue. I do agree with you. There is a real serious issue facing society that will undermine the cohesion of society in terms of the level of hate out there and the level of hate that's articulated online, and more generally, and worse in terms of the actual murdering of people, physical attacks, as you say, on two drag queens in Cork recently. But also the murder of a person because he was from another country. And I would have spoken to the minister of that country at the time in respect of that murder. And in terms of various other attacks. And recently I met a group of young people who were working with my department in respect of the child poverty programme. And they were a group of teenagers with different ethnic backgrounds, Irish citizens. But who spoke about the fear in going into town. Or in one case, a guy said to me his younger sister was chased home from school because of their ethnic background. So there's a very real issue here. And I spoke recently to Dublin City Business Initiative involved in various supports for people in different communities. And a number of employers just instanced to me the number of very serious assaults on employees because of their ethnic background. So this is not isolated cases anymore. And this is, I believe, very serious. I met church leaders recently, all the interfaith groups. This was the common issue. The fear of attack. The Indian community suffered significant harassment recently. There's fear there. This is something we didn't have to deal with to this extent 5 years ago. And I do think it's above party. And I fully agree with you. And I think the algorithm issue, without question, is an issue. And the toxicity directed quite a number of politicians. You yourself was a victim of quite a bit of that when you were a minister. And the Gardaí do, by the way, exceptional work in helping politicians and helping people to deal with such attacks. They are very professional. They have a great sense of perspective in terms of the various types of threats and incidents that happen. But it is at a level that I've never experienced in my life in terms of the approach to the political world. And it is very, very serious. I think the hate crime we brought in last year, at least and you recall the last government got into very choppy waters within the House and politically. But we did get through the penalties have been substantially increased for hate crime either on ethnicity,
Deputy,
sexual
come back
orientation or whatever.
Deputy O'Gorman.
But there was a time in the last Dáil when there was a preponderance of opinion that suggested that the
So
idea
far
of hate
behind,
crime
Tishuk.
legislation
Yes,
was
still
something
have
that
a
wasn't
minute.
needed and so on like that.
Deputy
We have a real
O'Gorman.
problem.
Taoiseach, thank you for your reply and for your recognition of the threat and the fear that's been generated in Irish society. And I think this is important to recognise in terms of its risk to the democratic norms as well. We think of the recent presidential election, the AI-generated fake of apparently Catherine Connolly pulling out of the campaign, and of course the awful slanders that were put out about Jim Gavin. They were seen 700,000 times before he got to respond. No amount of fact-checking is ever going to put that genie back into the bottle again. Tishuk, last year, Commission Man published its draft code of conduct, and in that it included a regulation of the algorithms that direct the social media platforms. But when the finalised version was published later in the year, they were omitted. Can I ask that the government would look at that again? Because I truly believe that if we are serious about tackling this epidemic of hate that is in our society, that is causing a risk to vulnerable people and to democratic norms, we have to tackle those algorithms.
Tishuk.
I certainly will revert back to government in respect of that, and will also engage, will ask the relevant ministers to engage with Commissioner Mann in respect of this. It's hate that's across the, different sectors. I mean, what happened in City West was appalling. The deliberate attempt to burn out a family in Drogheda. These are new thresholds that are being crossed, irrespective of the children could have been killed. That was a very lucky escape for children and a family when someone deliberately tried to burn, essentially, and so on like that. And so we have to be extremely conscious of what's happening in City West. The principals of the school spoke afterwards about the impact on children going to school the following day. They are not going to school because of the anxiety generated as a result of the aggression and the hostility and the hate articulated towards them.
The Albert Joel.
Taoiseach, I stand here